It takes a lot of horsepower to get a freight train moving, but how much power do you really need? 1,000? 3,000? 5,000? How about over 7,000? That's the power a Pennsylvania Railroad locomotive was outputting in the 1940s and 50s. But first, we need to rewind a bit to 1939. PRR President Martin W. Clement wanted his railroad to have faster and stronger freight power. He asked for the M1 mixed traffic engine to have its pulling power upgraded. A study was conducted and Clement was told this wasn't possible. Instead, the Pennsy would invest in the idea of duplex locomotive power and create a successor to the M1. The duplex type provided extra speed, power, efficiency, and balance by splitting the driving power between two sets of driving wheels on a single rigid frame. It's unlike an articulated, which has a separate front frame that pivots. The duplex also provided for less wear and tear on tracks, as shorter and lighter side rods could be used for smaller driving wheel sets. French engineer Jules Petit pioneered the duplex design in 1863 for the French Northern Railway. His concept wasn't replicated for any other engines though. The concept returned in 1937 with the Baltimore and Ohio's Class N1, a 4444 named the George H. Emerson. A few years later in 1939, the Pensy's Altoona shops built the lengthy S1, a one-of-a-kind 6446 duplex. Their next project was the dual-service Q1, conceived as a 4646. The final design had a streamlined shroud designed by Raymond Loewy and a 4644 wheel arrangement. 4 pilot wheels, 6 drive wheels, another set of 4 drivers, and 4 trailing wheels. The rear cylinders were placed next to the firebox to reduce the wheelbase length, which was a problem with the S1. The Q1 could reach speeds over 70 miles per hour with 77-inch drivers. It could produce 6,000 horsepower and 93,043 pounds of tractive effort. Engine and tender weighed in at 1,027,870 pounds. They came in at a length of 122 feet 9 inches and a height of 15 feet 6 inches. At a cost of $595,000, number 6130 was delivered in early 1942. Its first run in May had it hauling 125 freight cars from East Altoona to Enola, Pennsylvania, maintaining about 40 miles per hour. It was then transferred to the large St. Clair Avenue Roundhouse in Columbus, Ohio, and ran freight trains around the state and to Chicago, Illinois. Problem was, the Pennsy didn't see much of a future in the class, and despite being
mixed traffic,
I can't really find anything proving it ever ran with a passenger train. Speaking of which, its passenger-sized drivers often slipped with heavy freight, the rear cylinders faced increased deterioration due to the firebox region being hot and full of dust, and it often just lost or lacked power due to the long steam pipes and a small firebox resulting from the rear cylinder's position. 6130 spent too much time in the shops rather than out on the rails. Overall, the engine was just too expensive to operate and maintain, and it offered minimal benefits over conventional locomotives. Not wanting to give up on potentially powerful duplex freight engines, the Pennsy produced the Q2 freight model in 1944, a 4464. It was a pretty similar size to the Q1, the main difference being its performance. At the Altoona Static Testing Plant, the Q2 produced a whopping 7,987 horsepower and 115,816 pounds of tractive effort. This made them the most powerful steam locomotive ever tested. It was 78% more powerful than the Pensy's other steam engines, and the railroad claimed it could haul 125 cars at over 50 miles per hour. Improvements over the Q1 included relocating the rear cylinders behind the first set of drivers, smaller driving wheels suited for freight service, an anti-wheel slip mechanism, and less streamlining, making it easier to maintain. By this point, the Pennsy had amassed a fleet of impressive steam locomotives. Wanting to show these modern engines off, the PRR hosted an exhibition in Chicago in December 1944. Included in this were the Q1 and the first Q2, number 6131. A total of 26 Q2s were built from 1944 to 45. Out on the rails, they managed freight trains easily and got the job done. Reliability was much higher, they ran smoothly, and they were actually decently successful. Art for the Pennsy also featured the Q2. Unfortunately, their cost effectiveness was little to be desired. While internal documents listed the type as a high-speed freight locomotive, the class was hindered by the Pensy's 50-mile-per-hour speed limit on freight trains. At this speed, it wasn't much more powerful or efficient than a conventional 210-4J1 class. A locomotive that could be operated at a much lower cost, wasn't nearly as large, and could still provide plenty of power. The Q2s also used up lots of water very quickly. With dieselization creeping in, it was just another nail in the coffin for the class. Sometime after the Chicago exhibit, the Q1 had its streamlining removed, and it was scrapped in 1949 after running only about 60,000 miles. By the early 50s, the Q2s were retired and scrapped a few years later. None of the railroad's original duplexes survive today. Dieselization was complete by the end of 1957. The Pensy's duplex engines were ambitious and costly experiments, with varying degrees of success. The Q-Series was held back by their large, complex design and the railroad's own speed limits, leading to performance that wasn't far off from cheaper conventional engines. Sure, the Q2s proved a bit more successful, but it was just a bit too late. They only ended up with about 6 to 7 years of service. Perhaps the Pennsy learned that in this case, simple was better and smaller was more efficient. Thank you to my channel members. Special thanks to Grand Canyon Studios, Tommy Rosini, and Mooter for subscribing to the Conductor tier.